I'm very pleased to be joined by Queens City Council member Melinda Katz. She is a candidate for New York City Comptroller. Welcome to CityWide.
Thank you for having me.
You are arguably the third most powerful woman elected official in the city of New York, municipal official, after Christine Quinn, Speaker of the City Council, Betsy Gottbaum, the public advocate. You are the chair of the council's Land Use Committee. You would be a slam dunk for re-election to your seat in Queens now that the council has extended the term limits law. Instead, you are in a crowded, competitive campaign to be the city controller. Why?
Well, you know, Ken, first of all, life's not about easy choices. And having said that, also, let me thank you for having me here today. I'm very excited to be on CUNY. I was an adjunct professor of CUNY, so anything I can possibly do for the school system, we love. But life's not about easy choices. Life is about what you can possibly do, I believe, for your future, for your child's future, and in my case, as an elected official and a government official, for the future of the city of New York. I've been the chair of the Land Use Committee for 7 years. I was a state assembly member for 5 years. I was an M&A lawyer, for 5 years before that. We had to look around to see where we wanted to be in our future. 2.5 years ago, I decided that because of my experience and because of what I've already done for the city, that controller of the city of New York would be the best possible place for me to be. It wasn't a consolation prize. It wasn't something that I thought of because I couldn't run for re-election. This was something that I have looked at because of my expertise and because of my experience with the city for years. So again, life's not about easy choices. Life's about what you can do for your city, and that's the choice I made.
So what is the nexus, though, between the experience that you've had in the city council, particularly on the land use side, and the controller's office? Because I can make the argument that the public advocate position, while it doesn't have the same staff or influence, is more directly connected to development issues and land use issues, both by appointment to the City Planning Commission that the public advocate has, but also because of the closer connection with the City Council where land use decisions are made.
Well, a few things. I guess number one, I am by far the most experienced elected official in this race. After spending 5 years as an assembly member, 5 years doing the state budget, 5 years working with my colleagues and the governor up in Albany to make sure that the budget was balanced and make sure that the money was being spent properly to create working jobs in the city. The second thing is, as land use chair, a lot of my job as land use chair was negotiations. You have to have the financial expertise to be sitting across from a developer who says to you, listen, unless you give me more space to build, unless you give me higher heights, unless you give me much more bulk on the bottom, which clearly a lot of communities don't want, I can't afford to build this building. So in a job where my main priority over the last 7 years has been to create affordable housing, create jobs, while still protecting communities all over the city. In fact, we're almost reaching 8,000 blocks in the city of New York that we have protected. If it weren't for my financial background as a mergers and acquisitions attorney, I wouldn't really be able to negotiate that fairly. You have to be able to stand up to folks in a room and say, listen to me and listen to me closely. You can build affordable housing. You can create these jobs, and they can be good paying prevailing wage jobs, because I know how much it costs to build this building, and I know what your costs are going to be in every category. So that experience, I believe, will do me well in the investment world of the controller's office, where you need to not only know how to invest the money in order to get a return, because that is your priority. You also need to be able to know how each of those companies can benefit New York besides the return on the money. And that's the expertise I bring here. As a mergers and acquisitions attorney, it was my job to look at companies and figure out how to structure the company, structure the corporation, work with the shareholders or the board of directors for executive pay, figure out how those items were going to work. All of those, I believe, fold into a controller who a year ago, that asset and that experience would have been, I think, a very good experience. Today, I think it's priceless.
What about the notion that you're too close to the business community, that the job of the land use chair is to forge consensus, and that by definition, in most cases, the applicant is going to wind up getting their application approved with whatever compromises are negotiated, and that the city has been too development oriented?
Well, the interesting part about that is just, the factual aspect of it, and I hate to mix the rumor mill and political world out there with facts, but let's try it just for the fun of it. Probably by July, we will reach 8,000 blocks that have been downzoned, which means if you wanted to build a 10-story building next door, you couldn't because of the application that the Land Use Committee passed. So for 8,000 blocks in this city, we have downzoned the areas. That's not including, by the way, landmarking, historical districts, school sightings, and all of the great things that we've done there as well. There's about 800 blocks in the city that we worked with builders to create jobs, to create affordable housing, and to make sure that the economy of this city actually moved forward, which is a priority out there, especially during these very difficult economic times where we have actually nowhere to go. But I will say this. When you get into a room with builders and you get into a room with folks that tell you that they need a certain amount of height and width in order to be able to build affordable housing or in order to be able to create jobs, my job is to fight for the community. My job is to get in there and fight with them and say, this is what you need to do in order to deal with the fact that you are building a building or that you are working in a neighborhood. And that's really been my benefit. And at the end of the day, the council member whose district it's in was right alongside with us in most of the fights and ended up also voting for projects. And it was only because of the compromises that we were able to make as chair of the Land Use Committee.
The land use process is a reactive one for the council.
Yes.
In most cases, you're not instituting this. Either it's the Bloomberg administration is bringing a proposal forward, or it's a private developer who's doing it, or in some cases the Landmarks Commission. What policies have you championed to sort of direct the way in which the city's development initiatives have flowed?
Well, I guess a few things, and you are correct, and it's a little known thing, so because of your expertise, you know this. We are a reactive committee. In other words, in order for any application to come through us, it has to start with the City Planning Commission, which is clearly a mayoral agency. I see all the advertisements now that the mayor has on TV talking about all the affordable housing he created, all the jobs he created. Well, if he did that through development, it had to come through our committee. And he also will talk, I'm sure, about protecting communities, and that also came through our committee. We've had many discussions with city planning about the protecting communities, making sure that, a lot of folks in communities argue against McMansions, and rightfully so. I live in a small neighborhood in Forest Hills. If they were knocking down 3 buildings and or 3 houses and putting up huge buildings, I would argue as well. So we have talked with city planning, negotiated with them, and worked with them to give us applications of downzonings. And really, that's why we're almost at 8,000 blocks. Also, we provided more money to the City Planning Commission to be able to do more EIS studies and be able to study communities that have to be downzoned. You got to remember, we haven't done a resolution rezoning the entire city since 1961. But we always have to keep our eye on the ball. It's not only about protecting communities, it's also about keeping New Yorkers working in this city. And there has to be a balance. So
how would you carry those policies forward if you were the controller?
Well, a few things. Number one, the controller controls, excuse the pun, about $100 billion of investments internationally. It used to be 106, now it's about 85, and it will fluctuate depending on the market. There's a few things. Number one, I believe in investing in businesses that invest in New York. You want a portion of the hard-working dollars that men and women have made in our city and have entrusted the controller to do. There are 2 things you need to show me, partly. One is that we're going to get a return on the money that's required by law, a return on the money that folks deserve in their pension funds. That is the threshold issue, absolutely the threshold issue. But the second thing, why can't we look at businesses that invest in New York? You want a portion of the millions of dollars or billions of dollars that we have to offer in investment? How many jobs are you creating in New York? Where are your business offices? Can you move them to the city of New York?
But if every jurisdiction did that, then all the companies that are headquartered in New York would lose out.
Right, but that's why you need to put a small portion of money aside for this in order to make sure that you are benefiting New York. I understand what you're saying about other jurisdictions. New York City, Albany may be the capital of New York. New York City is the capital of the world. And we need to make sure that our people are working. That's my number one priority, and that will be my number one priority. So invest in companies that invest in New York, extremely important. How many jobs are you creating here? Are you going to train New Yorkers that may be losing their jobs in order to work in your company? The other issue is also debt distress funding for the city of New York and for companies all over. There are a lot of companies now that in the heyday of the financial market took out loans beyond belief. And right now they are getting a return on their money. They are getting on their balance sheets a profit. The problem is, and many New Yorkers will know that because it's affecting thousands of New Yorkers today, they can pay their bills of everyday life, but the debt that was required during the heyday is very difficult to overcome. So I envision not only getting return on our money, but actually saving jobs in our city by doing debt distressed funding, restructuring corporations, going in there, keeping those jobs right here in New York.
I want to talk about some other aspects of the Comptroller's office and also the campaign to get into that position when CityWide continues right after this. Welcome back to CityWide. We're talking politics with City Council member Melinda Katz, candidate for City Controller. How would you assess the performance of the current Controller, Bill Thompson, candidate for mayor?
I think Billy's done a very good job as Controller. I'll give you an example. When he became the Controller 7 years ago, he actually had a lot of foresight. He diversified the pension funds, for instance. He took us out of a lot of U.S. equities. He put us more into private equity, a little more into real estate. He also put us much more into fixed income, which, by the way, in hindsight, many folks probably wish they had known he did that so they could follow suit. So I think he's done a good job. He also utilized the office for something similar to what I want to do, which is he went to the banks of the city and said, listen, I want to invest $200 million in your banks with the pension money. This is what I want in return. I'd like you to put banks into underserved communities all over the city. And that gave the opportunity of folks all over the city, no matter what neighborhood they were living in, to have the same access to whatever loans or lines of credits are out there, and also banking opportunities. So I think he's done a very good job, and I'd like to build upon what he's done.
Is it the job of the Controller to be a counterweight to the mayor?
I think it's the job of the Controller to clearly be an unbiased opiner of what the mayor does. Clearly you have to make a fiscal report. Clearly you have to audit the city agencies and look to see how the agencies are doing. And despite what I hear and see out in the community, the agencies are run by the mayor of the city of New York. The buck stops with him. So I think to a certain extent, he has to be a counterweight. He has to be an unbiased view on how the money is being spent in the city, whether it's being spent efficiently, and whether the agencies can do better with the dollars they get, especially in today's day and time.
Let's talk about the campaign for a second. 4 candidates, all members of the City Council, roughly the same age within a range. Some
Thank you for that, I think. One of them's younger than me, so I appreciate it.
Some diversity in terms of geography, but not much. Some diversity in terms of gender, but not much. You're the only woman in the race.
I would say that's a
one candidate of color, no African American, no Latino, Asian American candidate. But I would be willing to bet that if I took the voting records of yourself, of David Weprin, John Liu, David Yaski, and compared them, that on 90% of the issues, you would all voted the same way.
I would say that hopefully by the time something reaches the floor of the council, a lot of the kinks had been worked out, a lot of the negotiations had been done. If the whole point of government is actually to accomplish things, you want to make sure that by the time it gets to the floor, that you actually have somewhat of a consensus. And in land use, we see that, right? The mayor sends over a downzoning or an upzoning, and it's your job to negotiate it and make sure that it's better when it gets to the floor. So I would say in general that's probably true. On some of the controversial issues, congestion pricing, the term limit issue, the cell phone ban issue. I mean, have been, I think, certain distinctions between our voting record.
So how do you distinguish
It's
yourself?
more the job at the council that was distinctive.
Right. How do you distinguish yourself? What separates you from the other candidates?
Well, I mean, look, first of all, let me just say that I think the city of New York is very fortunate to have 4 candidates who I think all have great assets that can offer the city of New York. So I think that in a day and time where people are sick and tired, I think, of the everyday politics, we have very good substantive candidates running for controller. So that's number one. But number two, I think our styles are different, and I think our expertises are different. Our expertise is very different. I am an attorney. I believe that you can make investment choices, make auditing choices, make governmental choices based on the facts that you learned for restructuring corporations, for actually looking to see how it can benefit the city of New York. Also, as the land use chair, the one distinction, and we always hear about this all over the city when we go to clubs, a lot of my opponents, and I hear this from other candidates as well, I fight for this, I fought for that, I'm a fighter from day one, and a lot of my opponents talk about that. I believe in fighting, and I believe that we have better projects in this city and more affordable housing, and I have created thousands of jobs in this city because I was willing to sit in a room with the administration and with builders and say, this is what you need to do in order to make it better for the city of New York. So I believe in fighting, and I don't think that my reputation out there is for being humble or subtle. But at the end of the day, you have to win some fights. It's not enough to fight. I think New Yorkers are tired of everyone standing up and saying, I'm fighting for you, but they don't see any results from it.
Well, they don't really believe in politicians anymore.
Well, they don't believe in politicians, and quite honestly, I mean, because New Yorkers are working 2 jobs to make ends meet. They're being told by the federal government that billions of dollars is coming down in order to make their lives easier. Meanwhile, not one credit line has opened, and I don't know about you, but my mortgage company didn't call me and tell me that they have this great line of credit ready just for my benefit. It's not happening. New Yorkers are not feeling like anyone's fighting and winning for them. They feel like folks stand up, do press conferences, talk about what they're going to try to do, and then it doesn't get done. They're paying more for subway, more for bus. Their kids are having larger classrooms. Everyone's talking about cutting education. They call 311, and it's months before they get a reaction, and who can blame them? And then they hear on TV how things are supposed to be getting better. So I understand that. And so my point to you is that as this campaign goes forward, I think there's going to be a very large distinction on fighting for fighting purposes and actually fighting to try and make it better in the city of New York.
You're the only woman in the race.
Thank you.
You are in the legislature. When you were in Albany, a lot of the legislation that you passed was in support of women's health services, but you don't have a reputation as being a yeller. In other words, it's not solely about identity politics for you. But in a political context of this race, you have a relatively young child. I know that a lot of women are concerned about that. Brilliant young child and good looking too. But I know that women on the campaign trail wonder how you can balance your responsibilities. Not necessarily a question that they would ask the male candidates who have kids. So my question to you is, in this particular political fight, this race for controller with these 3 other candidates, does being a woman help or hurt or no effect on the voters? Well,
a few things. Number one, yes, I am a woman. It's a clear distinction, and I'm not a yeller. I don't feel that I need to point that out. At least I'm hoping at my age I still don't have to yell to point that out. So that's a clear and obvious distinction. More importantly, when I was in Albany, I fought the HMOs in order to gain direct access for women for gynecological services, because the HMOs told me that a woman needs to have a doctor tell her when she needs a gynecologist. I also passed very, very strict laws to help prosecute sexual abusers of children. Not necessarily always considered a woman's issue. But my perspective in Albany has always been, and in the City Council as chair of the Land Use Committee, all I do is bring my perspective in life to the job that I have. I am a woman, but everything's a woman's issue. Transportation's a woman's issue. Why? Because people are working 2 jobs and need to get home, and women care deeply about that. Construction's a woman's issue because we want our children to go to school near our homes, and we don't have to want to choose to send them halfway across the city. So I guess number one, that's just the clear distinction. I do have a 1-year-old son, and he is brilliant, of course. But at the end of the day, all my opponents have children as well, and I would hope that they are as good fathers as I try to be a mother, and I'm sure they are. I was brought up by a single parent. It was my father. My mother died when I was 3 years old, and my father was left with a 3-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 15-year-old, and his wife died instantly a day later in a car crash. And I would have to say that I think he did pretty darn well as a single father and a working dad.
He was also not in public office, but he was somewhat a public figure.
Yes, he was.
In Queens artistic circles. How did that impact on you?
Well, I mean, since I had no mom and he had no wife, I actually ended up, I don't know what you call it, chaperoning him to many events. I mean, I was 8 years old, 10 years old, with him at the concerts. And, well, he was the founder and director of the Queen's Symphony Orchestra. And my mother, not wanting to be upstaged by her husband, founded the Queen's Council on the Arts, both of which are huge organizations today and still in existence. But my dad not only was an orchestra conductor, he ran a summer camp in the summertime. He was a father of 4 kids. And I joined him at many, many events. But I will say this, the one lesson I learned from my dad, and it's important for this, there's 2 things. Number 1, I learned what he did every day to affect one person's life made a huge difference in that person's world. The second thing my dad taught me, which was very interesting, and I think that it served me well in my life, you want to get ahead in life, do the best job where you are. And that's what I've tried to do in the Assembly, that's what I've tried to do in the Council. And that's what I would do as Controller. Controller is not a stepping stone for me. Controller is the job that I feel I can best serve the citizens of the City of New York.
A pundit recently quoted in the New York Observer said that he thought that fundamentally you were a very shy person. So is having your father who was out sort of performing, is that, is that characterization of you correct? That it's who are you? If you had a choice between spending the afternoon taking your son to the park or fighting for parks for all New Yorkers, how do you balance that?
I would take my son to the rally to fight for parks for all New Yorkers. My son happens to be a very social guy, so I have to tell you, we go out to events and he would just go to someone. At the end of the day, he still wants mom, which I am thrilled with. But he's a social guy. I don't know how that happened. God only gives you what you can handle. He knew he had to give me a good child, I think.
And if there was one thing that you could do, briefly before we end the show, if there was one thing that you could do that would benefit him when he gets to be an adult in the role as City Controller, what would that be?
I want to make sure that this city remains the center of the universe that I believe it is. I want to make sure that he has the same opportunities that I had, which was vast, and many more opportunities than most anyone I know. And I'm a very lucky person and a very fortunate person. My son is being brought up, by the way, in my old house. I live in the house that my parents brought me up in. He's being brought up in my old bedroom, which is a very, very interesting thing as an adult. I would want him to have the exact same opportunities that I was fortunate enough to have in life.
My thanks to Queens City Council member Melinda Katz, candidate for New York City Controller. I'm Ken Fisher. Thanks for joining us in this edition of CityWide.